Hi, my name is Nathan Blades, and for my project, I focused on how the incarceration system doesn't treat its inmates to the full standards that it should be. I titled my paper "Locked Up and Lockdown," and I focused mainly on the misconduct of inmates, and should we count them as humans with how we treat them, and should we also classify them as humans. There's many ways in the incarceration system that we don't treat them as actual human beings. Some of that being poor education, poor health care, solitary confinement, mental health issues, and then just discrimination against the different races. So the first one I'm going to talk about is solitary confinement, and should it be considered torture. Most people have mental health issues going into the incarceration system, and then once you put them into solitary confinement, it makes those even worse. It focuses on paranoia. It brings more feelings of uncontrollable rage and fear, and then it also increases the risk of suicide. So if you think about the issue, you put them in the solitary confinement, and then that's going to enhance their feelings of rage and fear. So it's going to make it even worse. So they're just going to stay in there even longer and longer and longer, and then that's just going to prolong the cycle of them coming out. And then I have a person named Jacob Barrett who was in solitary confinement for 20 plus years, in and out very often, and the quote he says is, "It smells like a toilet of a men's locker room at a rundown YMCA. It's people farting, burping, and sweating, smearing shit on their walls and windows, flooding the toilets of piss and shit." So it really just kind of shows you how solitary confinement actually is. If they flood their toilets, they just leave them, they let them flood, they let their feces just stay in the room. They're in there for 23 plus hours a day, and sometimes if they're lucky they get an hour of recess, which is them by themselves in a cage outside, so it's really not even a recess. And then researchers believe that this actually damages the body and the brain also even more. They can't test the hypothesis because it's actually illegal, because it would be illegal to test the prolonged isolation, to put somebody in this to see how it would affect them. And then it is against the law, and we don't treat animals this way, but we treat humans this way, so it's kind of contradictory how we have laws in place, so we can't do anything with animals, we can't test them in this type of isolation, but we do it with humans on a daily basis. The next one I'm going to talk about is the mental health issue. In state prisons or state facilities, 73% of females have mental health issues, and then also 55% of males have mental health issues. And then in the federal system, 61% of females and then 44% of males have mental health issues. So how can we solve the mental health issues going into these facilities? Well, we need more diversion programs. There's a lot of different things that we could do instead of putting them in incarceration. We can use mental health courts, we can use drug courts, and then we can use CIT programs, which stands for Crisis Intervention Teams. So instead of putting them in the normal criminal justice system, for having mental health issues, for having drug issues, we put them in these specialized courts so they can go to different rehab facilities and actually get the help they need, because once they're in the incarceration system, they're never going to actually be rehabilitated, which is the goal of the incarceration system that actually never comes to fruition. And then to touch on a couple presidents that actually didn't really help this issue because they were tough on crime, or is the slogan that they went off of. President Bush, President Reagan, and then also President Clinton. During their terms, President Bush put in more than 243,000 people in the incarceration system. That includes local jails, state prisons, and then federal prisons. And then Ronald Reagan put in more than 129 in the same criteria. And then Clinton actually put in 670,000 people. And most of these crimes are petty crimes. They're drug crimes that can be solved with a fine or putting them in, like I said, rehabilitation facilities instead of putting them in the incarceration system that isn't actually going to help them. And then to focus on the racial injustices, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, currently there's 35% of people in incarceration systems are white, 38% are African American, and then 21% are Hispanic, and then the remaining about 6% is just everything else. And then actually, according to also the BJS, in more than 12 states in the United States, there are more than half of the population is African American. And if you kind of think about it, only 13% of the United States population is African American. So how do we have such high rates of this specific population in the incarceration system? How, if they only make up 13%, are they making up more than 38% in state and federal prisons? And then just to kind of study in New Jersey, which is one of the worst states for the racial injustices in the incarceration system, from the year 2000 to 2014, they did legislation changes, and they actually found out with the legislation changes, it overall lowered their prison population by 28%. That's all races, just went down by 28%. And then the African American population in the incarceration system went down by 13%. And how they did this is they changed the legislation by changing the small petty crimes, so the drug crimes, the traffic crimes, just simple things that we're putting people in the incarceration system for. They got rid of that legislation, and instead of putting them in, they actually gave them programs that would help them. And then just another thing on the racial injustices, in the United States, per 100,000 people, we put 716 people in the incarceration system. And then the United Kingdom, which is similar to us, per 100,000 only puts in 47. So there's a major difference between our country and many other countries in the world. Our country has the highest prison population in the entire world at 2.3 million. And if you look at other countries like China, Brazil, and Russia, they're not even above 1.5 million. So our country has very high numbers, even though we don't have a very high population in consideration to the rest of the world. In each year, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, we spend $52 billion on incarceration. Another way that we can help this problem is education. 43% of people, if they are given some type of formal education, will not return back into the incarceration system. It's said that if you give them any type of education, whether it's poor or whether it's good, that still stands. A lot of people think that if you give them a poor education, it's not going to help them in the long run. But actually, it's proven that any type of education, whether they take a whole lot out of it or not, lowers their risk because they feel like they have something to stand upon once they leave the incarceration system. Some of the ways that we can do this, there's academical and then there's vocational programs that we can do. The academical ones, we can do GED programs, we can do literacy tests. And in the FIC Petersburg, which is a prison, they do these, and it actually lowers their prison population, and the population that will come back after released, it lowers it significantly. We can also give them personal finance programs. Some of the other programs that they said that they can give are Spanish, math, and legal, just legal basics that help to lower their likelihood of coming back. And then some of the vocational programs that we can do is we can do computer design programs, we can do carpentry, mechanics, plumbing. Honestly, anything that gives them something to stand upon once they leave. Because in the incarceration system, once you leave, you're given nothing. You're giving a bus pass and whatever money you have left in commissary. So you're basically put out in the world and said, good luck. You have nothing else to stand upon. So there's no way that it's feasible for you to actually be able to become a normal citizen like we expect you to be once you come out of the incarceration system. And then, like I said earlier, $52 billion is spent every year on the incarceration system. And in a study done, if you spend $1 million on correctional education, it can prevent 600 crimes. Opposed to if you spend the same amount, $1 million, on just basic incarceration, so updating their cells, giving them better food, it only reduces the crime by 350. So if you spend $52 billion every single year on education, it will actually lower the prison population by 52,000 every single year. So if we focus more on giving the people in the incarceration system education, proper health care, and focusing more on their mental health, once they come out of the incarceration system, they'll be better equipped to deal with all of the things that society has put on them. They'll be better equipped to actually become real citizens of the United States and actually be able to benefit us. Thank you.